Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. Okay, again, we're like all just in awe and processing and so excited about this surah. So I know every time you always think that you didn't do it justice, but it was incredible. Thank you so much. And we have questions from. Do you want to start us off? Okay.
So there's been multiple times in the Quran when we have dealt with the issue of when it is not okay to obey your parents. And obviously that's extremely relevant within the historical context because of what they were about to have to do. But a few nights ago you were talking about how a relationship with a sheikh is built on deference.
Yeah.
And it also made me think about Rami shared from an autobiography he was reading on Ibn Ajiba that Ibn Ajiba built a house for his shuyukh. So what do you have to say about the relationship that we should have in context when the parent is, or the sheikh, because I look at those two as very similar relationships, is passing down and is raising you from a place of a monotheistic place or a wise place.
Do you mind paraphrasing or?
Sharif is asking, it's an important question, the relationship of a teacher to a student is often compared to the relationship of a parent to a child. And the relationship of especially a teacher to a disciple it requires deference, because without deference the student cannot be taught. And so he's asking about the same thing about with parents. Well, if the extent to which and the your parents are educating you. Your parents are your teachers to a certain point in life. I mean, they're and there's no way that your parents are going to be able to raise you if you don't defer to your parents. But of course, as you said, that this is on the assumption that your parents are not teaching you to either to ignore God or to do something that is contrary to what God commands. So it's not, your parents are not ordering you or teaching you to do something haram. And the relationship of deference is basically, it's a presumption. It's that I presume that who I'm deferring to, parent or a teacher, I presume that they have good cause, that they have good reason, and that they have knowledge. And that I presume them to be so, and so I suspend my own judgment and defer to them. However, it's a presumption, meaning that I presume this to be the case until proven otherwise. So your obligation to investigate, to think, to analyze is never suspended. You're always in all relationships of deference, you're deferring to the point that you say to yourself, okay, I'm with a parent, and here's where a teacher and a parent really differ. With a parent, you say, okay, they're ordering me to do something, or they're telling me to do something that is wrong, and it's not my hawa. It's not that I just feel it's wrong. It's that I've done my due diligence, and it, I have now reason to respectfully disagree and respectfully say that I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. And that's the situation, like for instance, when the one we're talking about, where they tell you not to study was a certain teacher. The relationship of a parent as a teacher eventually comes to an end. When that point is, it depends. But eventually it comes to an end. Your parents are not your teachers forever. Your there comes to a point where, but your duty to be respectful and honor them, meaning treat them with respect and make them feel important and valuable, remains. That doesn't change. And again, we're talking about healthy relationships. We're not talking about abusive parents, or evil parents, or the was a teacher. The entire mentoring relationship is based on deference. It's based on your belief that this teacher is closer to God and is more knowledgeable, and that as long as you are being taught, you are saying, I presume my judgment to be invalid, and I defer to their judgment because they are my teacher. Now, in the rules of discipleship is that when you get to the point where that presumption is no longer, you're not convinced of that presumption anymore, then you terminate the relationship. It's not, you don't pick and choose. I mean, I don't know many teachers that will allow you to pick and choose if they're good teachers. But you respectfully and gratefully terminate the relationship. Ingratitude is never moral. So, every teacher that I've had in my life, I'm extremely grateful to. And there are teachers that taught me things that I moved well beyond. I mean, the teacher who read with me Hayat al-Sahaba, for instance, or the teacher who I memorized Riyad al-Salihin with, but they're not alive anymore. But if they were alive, or when they were alive, and I would meet them, I would kiss their hand, and I wouldn't interrupt them. If someone asked a question, I wouldn't answer the question in their presence. These are all part of the adab that you have with your teacher. The fact that I can no longer be their student is immaterial to what I owe them in terms of honor and gratitude. And these relational issues are critical for the building of virtue in society. Because otherwise, then all types of relationships start breaking down. Teachers no longer want to mentor, and students no longer have a mentor. And parents start looking out for number one, as we see in the society we live in. A parent will will have no qualms about dating and focusing on their own life, even when it endangers the welfare of their child. I mean, the idea of sacrifice and so on, it's not rewarded, and that's the problem when that system of virtue breaks down. Um, yeah, I mean, what Ibn Ajiba, like building a house for his teacher and so on, if you are if you're talking the way that it should be done, um, yeah, if I had money and I saw my teacher needs a car, I would definitely buy them a car without a second thought, because what they gave me in knowledge I cannot repay. And the the worst thing is to appear like a person who has no adab in the hereafter, that I was given knowledge and I simply acted like I'm entitled to it. You're not entitled to anything. And you're not entitled to anything. That sense of entitlement and the 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 gratitude you carry for, it's the same gratitude I carry for my parents who taught me and took care of me. Uh, the worst thing that human beings do is that they expect gratitude from others, but they don't extend gratitude to others. And that's a disease. That's a social disease. It's a social disease. And and that's why we see the same cycle. People treat, when they get old, they're treated by their kids not very nicely, as they've done with their parents, and that cycle just keeps going on and on and on. It, reflecting upon what you owe to other human beings is the beginning of morality. If you don't know gratitude to other human beings, you won't know gratitude to God. And it's all a package. Gratitude can't be cut up. You can't say, well, I'm grateful to God, but I have, and every human being, the most important, anyone, of course, took care of you as a child, there is gratitude, but knowledge, ilm, is the thing that you should be the most grateful to. And knowledge is not data. Like, it's not like you read, it's not that all of us owe a huge debt of gratitude to Sheikh Google. Because Google teaches you data, not hikmah. Data is just information, it's not knowledge.
Yeah, follow up.
Yeah, just very quickly, because what do you think is our path to reclaiming that? Because I mean, this exists both in secular circles with universities in terms of how we treat professors, or exists in the Islamic realm, whether the teacher is qualified or not, but there's a sense of entitlement when it comes to our teachers. There's almost of, it's your job to make it entertaining for me, it's your job to make it sexy for me, it's your job to make it relevant to my life, and if I'm not entertained within the first 30 minutes, or sorry, if I'm not entertained within the first 30 seconds, then I'm going to move on because this didn't satisfy that itch. And that seems so drastically different from what built us as a civilization. So what's our path? I mean, it seems more in line with like Muntel al-Fukhur, that we boast arrogantly even as students. So what's our path forward to reclaiming that tradition and honoring knowledge so that it becomes wisdom and doesn't just become arrogance?
You know, the current attitude that pervades society will lead to the crumbling of civilization. There's no question. Because the I mean, to the extent that it is still maintained, so that teaching still attracts the best minds, and the relationship between teachers and students is still sufficiently solid so that experience and knowledge is transmitted and results in creative activity, to the extent that that relationship exists, you will continue to have civilization. To the extent that it breaks down, civilization crumbles, and it's on the way. You know, it's just a matter of time before society feels the impact of that crumbling. Now, of course, the Islamic civilization, what we are experiencing is what you would experience in a crumbled civilization, where people don't have a real appreciation or real understanding for what role knowledge plays, and they confuse between the knowledge which is necessary for the existence of the values that sustain society. Society is not sustained by empirical sciences. A society is not sustained by a good engineer, a good doctor, a good chemist. They perform functions within society. But what builds society is the type of knowledge that produces virtue, social mores, social values. They're not produced by the empiricists. Empiricists are people who perform a function within the society. And that value system has collapsed in Islam. It has collapsed completely for many different reasons, but it has completely collapsed to the extent that we are, if you really come to any Muslim and you interrogate them as to what is the role of social sciences, what is the role of the sciences of society, they're utterly confused. They're not sure, and they might, they think that a civilization can be built on making a good business, or making, being a doctor or being an engineer but it doesn't gel, and that's why we're stuck. That's why the best philosophers in the world are not Muslim. The best sociologists are largely not Muslims. The best ethicists are not Muslim. The people that lead the world intellectually are not Muslim. We've been absent from the playing field for a long time, and you reclaim them by, I believe, in the case of Islam, by doing exactly what we're doing, going back to the Quran. I think that what built the civilization in the first time is what's going to build the civilization again, and that is why I hope it changes after I'm gone. But when I find that the students of innovative approaches to the Quran, those who study the Quran not to repeat the taqleed of the classics, not to just repeat what Razi said or what Qurtubi said. That's easy. It's easy for anyone to just sit and say, let me tell you what Razi said, or let me tell you what Ghazali said. These are the taqleed. But what is much harder is to take all of that and to think of the values that are necessary to rebuild civilization again. And so I'm hoping that someday, maybe after I'm gone, that instead of the students of this being, whatever, less than 100, definitely, it will be in the thousands. And then that might be the beginning of a sign that things are going to change in the Islamic civilization. If you don't preserve at least the idea, then all is lost. At least when you preserve the idea, you're maintaining the seed. Yes, the seed takes a long time to become a plant, to become a tree, but you need to preserve the seed. And I think that's what we're doing. Building institutions of learning that simply repeat the classics ad nauseum, which is the pietistic affectations that so many American Muslims are so fond of. Someone that looks like they came from the medieval age, someone that acts like they came from the medieval age, exotic, sort of orientalist, they look like they came from the deserts of Mauritania or the deserts of Morocco or the deserts of Egypt or whatever. Just exotic and weird, and then oh wow, we have Ghazali again. That's never going to produce anything. That will keep Muslims at the footstool of humanity, backwards and retarded.
Think of anyone in particular?
You want to go next?
Yes. Just a quick one, thank you very much, Sheikh. I know you mentioned Luqman and Miriam are the only two surahs that are mentioned after someone who is not a prophet. Of course, Miriam,
We
debate, but yeah. They're the only two surahs named after people. When we were going through the halaqa, I thought there could be a deeper connection. Of course, you have here Luqman and his son, but in Surah Miriam, so much of Surah Miriam is about parents and children.
Mm-hmm.
Zakaria and Yahya, Zakaria and Miriam and Isa, Ibrahim and the father. You have a Miriam, Ibrahim saying, Ya abati, Ya abati, Ya abati.
Yeah.
You got Ya bunay, Ya bunay, Ya bunay. So, just that connection there. Miriam was all about rebellious, building a society of rebellious women, because that's what you need to build a civilization. Could this be a society of respectful but rebellious sons and daughters? Oh, I'm just reading that. It's just a thought.
No, it's actually really interesting. I didn't think of it.
Can you repeat that for people?
Yeah, what Joe's saying is that there's a very interesting parallel, because these are two surahs, Maryam and Luqman, that are named not after, human beings who are not prophets, proper names. And Maryam, so much of the Surah Maryam is about parenthood and the that relationship between the parent and the offspring, and of course Surah Maryam then focuses on the role of women, and then here we have the father who's teaching the child to be reverent, but not intellectual zombie, to actually not obey if it involves disobeying God. And that's a really interesting parallel. I didn't think of that, but it's really worth pursuing and developing. Because it is significant that these two surahs force us to reflect on that theme of generational continuity. I mean, it's a generation passing on to another generation, but passing a set of values and what's so fascinating about these two surahs is how the parent and child speak to each other and interact with each other. Yeah, so it's a really interesting theme.
Found the commentary.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
My question is about when we first get introduced to Luqman, and then the first thing that he tells his son, and then it's followed by verses 14 and 15, which seems to be now the voice of God speaking, and then you go back to Luqman.
Right.
I mean, what like that interlude? What
I mean,
what sense
it is.
Right, repeat.
Yeah, no. Rami is asking about something I sort of. I alluded to in passing that when Luqman is first introduced, and then Luqman, it says Luqman is speaking to his son, and then what interjects is God's voice, because God is saying, who associates partners with me, and then it goes back to the voice of Luqman, and it's as if the voice of God and Luqman, when it comes to this question of gratitude and worshiping God, are melt upon each other. They're sort of they're what is the word I'm looking for? They
Dissolve.
merge into one another. Yeah, merge into one another. And what is it? And what which means, of course, some commentators say, this is an indication that this conversation or this discourse between Luqman and his son is reported figuratively by God, that it is not what actually takes place, because some people said that Luqman's son was not a believer, was a kafir, and that Luqman gives him this, keeps advising him and teaching him until he eventually becomes a believer. But other commentators said, no, this is too literal. What God wants you to reflect on the interaction for a point, not for the history. That it's not an actual historical incident that you should think about whether it historically took place or not. But I think that the most important significance for that merging of the voices is that Luqman starts out with al-hikmah, and when he tells his son to that ash-shirk zulmun azim, that this is a great injustice, and then starts talking about the relationship between reverence and obedience, the voice of God comes through Luqman's hikmah. And I've always taken this to be a much larger point, and that is al-hikmah is from God. That although we, and this is what, the nature of virtue itself, that when someone combines ilm and ihsan to think through the most beautiful position, the most virtuous position, the voice that comes through is an inspiration from God. There was a teacher, I forgot who it was now, who used to say when he would teach us halaqas, I learn from what I teach you as much as you learn. Meaning that he's often surprised by what comes out of his mouth as much as his students are. And he's often educated by it as much as his students are. And I think that the nature of wisdom is like that. It's literally a gift from Allah. And that merging of the divine voice is not revelation, but it's a gift. It's an act of grace that Allah gives us. And that is precisely why gratitude for someone to say, I have wisdom but I'm not grateful, to me is a contradiction in terms. Wisdom is a gift given to humanity, and it is a divine gift. Yeah, anyway, that's how I've always taken it.
On behalf of all the parents whose students or children will be exposed to your teaching, and the generosity of you sharing the wisdom that God has given you, I extend my gratitude.
Thank you.
And also on behalf of the reverted ones that are born again Muslim. I certainly appreciate everything that you do for us. My question is on the number 17, on the notion of the Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. And knowing that the Shi'i actually puts this as two of the principles on the Furu al-Din. One is that the genesis of those ideas, the notions that was then brought into Shia? And more importantly, are there any etiquettes in actually enforcing those as just ordinary people? Because we see a lot of situations right now in Iran that because of the severe repression, under the name of, unfortunately, religion, that people are asked to be engaged in this, and then you see a lot of women particularly being harassed for their lack of conduct on hijab and different things. The question is, what are the etiquettes? And even more probably practical is perhaps in just healthy relationship for, let's say, parents and adult children, in which in most cases adult children are now know more than the parents do. What would be the etiquette if they were to Amr bil Ma'ruf or Nahy anil Munkar, or even in terms of peers and colleagues, at the expense of not to damage collegial relationship, how far and in what terms these things can happen.
Can you repeat the question for?
Yeah, the question is the important question about the etiquette of. I mean, really, the rules for enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, because without the further moral elucidation as to how to go about, or what are the parameters, what are the boundaries for enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, then you could have a lot of injustice committed. So, people could hurt other people in the name of trying to do what is good and forbid what's evil. And that question, of course, comes up with when you talk about children and parents, when you talk about relations in society. So the example that Parveen gave, which is in Iran, and which for a long time was in Saudi. I'm not sure what happens in Saudi now, but where women are harassed because of their head covering, or and that's taken as Amr Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, and of course, so then women are bearing the brunt of that dynamic. And one is that there's a lot written in the Islamic tradition about this. I mean, a great deal, and it's one of the fields, again, that unfortunately has been ignored, partly because the irony is that the intellects of those who were writing in various periods in Islamic history was far more sophisticated than the intellects of those who are studying their writings later on, and that creates so people who are studying, they often confuse, they don't understand what they're reading, and they don't understand the subtle distinctions are being made, and they don't. But first, I want to say that keep in mind that the first thing about al-amr ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar is that it is not about enforcement first. It is about a normative command, meaning what you must be engaged in intellectually and morally. So the first thing is that when it says al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar, is to know what is ma'ruf and to know what is munkar. So you are constantly, it's the first principle is that you cannot be oblivious, you cannot be neutral, you cannot be disinterested, you cannot be apathetic. You make it a personal quest to know what is good and what is bad. First. Second, your first obligation after the obligation to study and inquire and learn is not amrul ghayr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al ghayr anil munkar, but amrul nafs bil ma'ruf wa nahy al nafs anil munkar. So the first rule is that your obligation is not to command others to do what is good and to forbid others from doing what, but the first it's inside, because a lot of people hear amr ma'ruf and nahy munkar and they think that, oh well, it's all outward. It's not outward. It's first inward. Because remember, it is a huge sin and a huge act of hypocrisy to order someone to do something that you yourself do not do, or for you to act on the presumption of knowledge that you don't have, or for you to act on the presumption of hikmah that you don't have. So before you say something to someone, think, as a parent you are obligated, and you must, you must always think, well, relative to my child, I know more, and this is my obligation, and this is my duty, what can I do? Even if I'm not sure I know enough, I have to act on it. And same thing if you are a commander in an army. You are duty bound to order your soldiers. But other than these positional situations where you have a taklif to command, assuming the right to command, while if you assume and your assumption is an act of usurpation, that's haram, that you're going to be held responsible for. So if I, vis-a-vis, now there are some people who believe that they have the right to command their wives, for instance. I'm not one of those people. I don't believe that you have the right to command your wife, because she is an adult, just like you. She has an intellect, you have an intellect, and therefore before I say anything to my wife, I must think once and twice and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 10 times, because I know if I command her to do something and Allah knows that in my heart is hypocrisy, or that I spoke without knowledge, or that I lack the hikmah and I lack the due diligence in searching for the hikmah, the sin I incur is far greater than the sin of keeping silent. So this is then, so beyond, now we get beyond that, then we get into the rules of there is the morality of enforcement. The rules. Now, first, do you have the right to enforce? If the right to enforce are limited by positions, like a judge in their position, a commander in position, a sahib amal, someone who owns a business and then has people who answer to, and so on. But these are all positional situations, and they have certain rules that apply to them. But if you don't fall within these categories, you don't have a rule you have a right to enforce. All you have is a right to give nasiha. If you give nasiha, you must also be willing to receive nasiha. It's not one way. Now, if you give nasiha, you must abide by the ethics of nasiha.
Advice.
Nasiha is advice, yeah. So you cannot embarrass, your advice cannot cause more damage than it solves. Your advice cannot cause confusion. So if you bear the liability if your advice is confusing because you are not articulate or because you don't have sufficient knowledge. So it is not as simple as, okay, I'm going to go gung-ho and go around telling people. It is, the vast majority of people are not qualified to be teachers, and the vast majority of people are not. So if you're a parent, you have a defined role. If someone answers to you in a job, you have a defined role. If you're a judge, you have a defined role. The vast majority of people, their amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar is a moral exploration that is self-reflective. And it is sufficient to be self-reflective, so if they're told to do something wrong, they can be aware that this is wrong and refuse to do it, if they're told by someone other. But it doesn't mean that they tell others what to do. And this extends to the issue of hijab. I mean, I don't believe the state has a right, although of course the modern jurists will believe that given the state that jurisdiction, that's a big issue. But anyway, I don't believe the state has a right to enforce that rule of modesty, the issue of hijab. The al-awra al-mughallaza is something else. Basically the obscenity, like, you know, immodesty that's obscene. Like, you know, someone wants to walk nude in the street, then yeah, the state has a right to. But that type, where showing hair or not showing hair, I don't believe the state has a right to enforce it. And if the state doesn't have a right to enforce it, any average person who just assumes that role, and that's why so much of hikmah is based on humility. Humility, I mean, listen, put it this way. I've spent, I don't know now, how many years reading all the books that I've read in Sharia, all the books, and yet I actually I don't think I've ever entered an Islamic center or a mosque and corrected anyone or told anyone what to do. I don't think I've ever done it once. And yeah, I could see all that, but it's precisely because all that reading, when I see most people do most things, it is the long journey with knowledge makes me think, well, maybe they're not any of the Sunni mazhabs, maybe they're not any of the Shia mazhabs, maybe they're not Ibadi. Maybe they're one of the mazhabs that have gone extinct. Maybe they're this, maybe they're that. My mind starts, okay, how do I know that this person who's doing this or doing that? And even when I know for sure that what they're doing is wrong, I start calculating, well, are my intentions pure? Am I going to get a high from telling someone something? Do I know that I will do more good than harm? And by the time I think of all the different things, khalas. So I'm amazed at people that step in a mosque and start telling people how to do this and how to do that, and so I'm just amazed. And I'm not an exception. I mean, all the people that I know that have taken the same journey with knowledge end up exactly where I am. You frankly, you don't say anything until you're asked. And when you're asked, you are not exactly thrilled to instruct. You start thinking of all the responsibility that you're bearing. And you discharge your obligation, yes you do, but you don't do it with a lot of pomp and these are the ethics of knowledge. This is what knowledge is about. This is what Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, that is inward, is about. by the time you see all the ways that you are faulty and all this your sins and all your failures, you're so embarrassed to instruct anyone about anything. You're just saying, God, please don't treat me as a hypocrite. That's all you have energy for. And so, and I think that is, again, where does this come from? Comes from the way we raise our children. When we teach our children that this is a very important knowledge, that this is your entire soul at stake, that you must take this very seriously. This type of adab becomes natural. When we teach them that, this is just extracurricular stuff you do on your extra time as a pastime, then they do the stuff that we see Muslims do these days, where, Islam becomes just like a make-believe world. Not real values, not real virtues, not a real philosophy.
Alhamdulillah, I want to take this moment just to express my gratitude, because I feel that people who know me know that I started this journey when I was 27, and I often have told people close that the Sheikh re-raised me, as my teacher and, my friend, my partner, but I've witnessed so much of his personal example has been so powerful for me learning, because I felt I had to be re-raised and I had to start from the beginning. And when I hear this message, I pray that all of us can follow you on this journey, but I also want to say that if you can start at the age of 27 and be re-raised and find your path through this knowledge, through this methodology, and transform, which I feel like I was truly given the gift to take that path and that journey. People who knew, no one here knew me at that age, but if you knew me at that age, you would have met a very different person. And I'm so grateful for where I am today, and just when I hear you say this again, it's it just really brings it home. And so also for people who are watching and like Parveen, to say thank you, to be, like a revert and a born again. It's this is a path open for everyone, no matter your age. So thank you for that. And I think this is the perfect place to end. We're past the time, but that was a really wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking it. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And may we all be able to reach wisdom, inshallah. So, thank you. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. And we hope to see you guys on Tuesday, inshallah. Have a wonderful weekend. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Amin.